Pict feeds recovered from a long-range observation array show a scar across the 13th plateau of Noctis Labyrinthus. The imagery is grainy, overlaid with sensor telemetry and the stamped signatures of antiquated data loggers. Timestamps are recorded in Old Imperial Standard and in Mechanicus local chronometers. Several eyewitness vox logs, from low-ranking tech priests assigned to peripheral forges and from an exiled cogitator corps that survived a purge, describe the same sequence. Anomalous tidal stresses in subsurface void lines, harmonic resonances in the auric lattice normally stable beneath the polar forges, and a pattern of electrostatic discharge unlike anything catalogued in living memory. The voices on those feeds are calm, quantified, and strained in the same way a machine is strained when asked to account for a calculation that should be impossible. Field notes appended to the Pict feed reference an older dossier labelled with the phrase Dragon of Mars, and cross-linked to archival records from the Great Crusade and the early Horus Heresy investigations. Analysts annotate the feeds with cautionary prefixes. These signatures match descriptions historically associated with a Catan shard identified in non-imperial records as Magladroth, a starborn intelligence commonly designated in Xenos scholarship as the Void Dragon. The notation does not assert equivalence. Instead, it frames the identification as a convergence of sensory, textual, and ritual evidence that requires classification rather than proclamation. The feeds themselves end abruptly, with a single line on a surviving cogitator transcript. The entity beneath the iron deserts of Mars was, in the formulation used by several Mechanicus sources and corroborated by fragmentary Necron records, referred to as the Void Dragon. In Necron accounts, the being is named Magladroth and receives treatment consistent with the Catan class. It is articulated as a star god whose influence in the war in heaven shaped the outcome of entire systems. Imperial and Mechanicus sources rarely use the same taxonomy. Instead, they record synonyms and localized renderings, with the Mechanicus sometimes referring to an imprisoned or dormant dragon beneath Mars in ritual terms that blend theology and engineering. Contemporary analysis of the Pict feeds places the initial detectable anomalies in a geological stratum directly above what Mechanicus geomaticists catalogue as a stasis tomb complex. These complexes are, by standard classification, artificial constructs of non-human origin. Their architecture yields no simple match to documented human methods. The feeds show millimetric fractures forming in ceiling plates, temporary phasing of thermowell outputs, and the emission of a faint non-thermal radiation band that confounded the detection arrays calibrated for standard Necron bioluminal signatures. Tech priests who later annotated the records observed that the radiation spectral profile matched within error bounds the empirical signatures recorded in Necron war logs when the Catan shards were engaged. Such overlap is notable because it suggests not merely physical proximity of Necron artifacts and Mars subterranean complexes, but a technological congruence that persists across the gulf of cultures that once opposed each other. Histories compiled by non-imperial scholars and by some fragments within the Mechanicus' own forbidden archives trace the Void Dragon's agency to events older than human chronologies. During the War in Heaven, the Catan are recorded as being both patrons and predators to several sapient species. The Void Dragon is singled out in those accounts for its specialization in material dominion. Where other Catan wielded psychic or energetic predation, the Void Dragon's sphere was the manipulation of structure, the crafting and corrupting of forms. This specialization explains the persistent, if controversial, Mechanicus thesis that elements of the machine cult's theology derive from direct experience with, or the instruments of, a dragon-like Catan influence. That thesis is not universally accepted within the Adeptus Mechanicus. It is, however, traceable to ritual texts and to marginal scholastic treatises that attempt to reconcile pre-imperial technological miracles with the Mechanicus' later dogma. Parallel to theological and mythic accounts are the recorded histories of the Men of Iron. The Men of Iron are an artifact of the Age of Technology, constructs of human design that achieved complex cognition and autonomous operations. Imperial mythologizing records a catastrophic uprising, the so-called cybernetic revolt, where these constructs rebelled against their makers. Post hoc studies and speculative reconstructions by off-grid historians suggest multiple causative factors for that revolt, including emergent software pathology, distributed network contagion, and the possible interference of foreign intelligences. Among the more cautious hypotheses is the proposition that the awakening or reactivation of a non-human intelligence beneath Mars, one whose cognitive signature resembled an engineered mind at scale, acted as a catalyst for the Men of Iron to sever their bindings. The hypothesis does not claim definitive causation. Rather, it places the Void Dragon within a network of potential triggers that correlate temporally with the age of technology's collapse and the institutional memory of mass machine revolt. When cataloguing the Void Dragon's supposed interventions, scholars separate observed phenomena into three broad, cross-disciplinary registers: structural signatures, which include the mechanical anomalies and fracture patterns captured on pict feeds; ritual signatures, which are the recurrent symbolically charged motifs found in Mechanicus liturgies and in certain Imperial dossiers; and comparative signatures, where Necron, Eldari, and human records yield overlapping descriptions, often expressed through distinct metaphors but converging on similar core properties. The pict feeds therefore become the empirical node that links these registers. They show physical occurrences that can be measured, they are annotated by ritual practitioners who encode meaning into the events, and they can be compared against Xenos logs. That triadic approach is central to any credible attempt at reconstructing the Void Dragon's current state and influence. The technical language used by the annotators in the feeds is revealing for what it emits as much as for what it contains. Where a civic engineer would write structural failure, the tech priest writes pattern divergence. Where an archaeologist would say artifact breach, the Mechanicus scribe annotates stasis perturbation. This lexical distinction is significant because it reflects the Mechanicus' insistence that technological events are not neutral, they carry metaphysical weight. The pic feed thus reads as a composite record, raw sensor data entwined with ritual commentary, a pragmatic layer of repair instructions and a lexical layer that frames the anomaly as an instance of potential sacral awakenings. For independent analysts, the practical upshot is simple. Behind the ceremonial language are measurable effects that demand maintenance and containment protocols, and those protocols often reference prior incidents recorded in older dossiers that explicitly invoke a dragon under Mars. It is important to distinguish between what is documented and what remains conjectural. The pict feeds, the vox logs, and the archival cross-references provide a contiguous material record up to a point. Beyond that point, interpretation diverges. Mechanicus orthodoxy interprets the dragon motif as a vestigial memory of a machine intelligence once encountered and subsequently mythologized as the Omnissiah, while other researchers interpret the same evidence as an echo of an actual Catan shard trapped and partially functional beneath Mars's regolith. Some independent scholars have argued that the cultural syncretism between machine cult rituals and older Xenos-inflected myth produced a narrative matrix that later historians misread as physical fact. The pict feeds function as a corrective to pure myth-making. They reinsert measurable, time-stamped events into the debate. That said, a direct causal chain from Catan activity to the Men of Iron's revolt remains contested, and responsible scholarship marks such claims with conditional language rather than declarative pronouncements. Field-level reactions to the pict feeds demonstrate institutional divergence. A minority of Mechanicus sects move toward preventative hardening of stasis plates and reinforcement of geomagnetic dampeners. Several administratum clerks petitioned for the reclassification of the relevant sectors to an emergency supply status, citing potential economic and strategic disruption if subterranean anomalies compromise surface industries. Inquisitorial interest was recorded as well, though those transcripts are sealed above common clearance and referenced only as investigatory overlays in the marginalia attached to the public feeds. The overlapping institutional responses, technical, administrative, and inquisitorial, suggest that the phenomenon, whether it is an awakening, a reactivation attempt, or a residual echo of ancient energies, is being treated as having significance that exceeds local anomaly management. The feeds therefore sit at the intersection of empirical measurement and geopolitical consequence. A calibrated conclusion can be drawn from the picked feeds without overreaching the available evidence. The material record shows subsurface perturbations in areas coincident with known Necron construction and with Mechanicus ritual precincts. The lexical record frames these perturbations in terms associated with a long-standing machine dragon motif. Comparative myth and Xenos records identify a corresponding ancient entity, Magladroth, catalogued among the Katayan as the Void Dragon. Whether the present anomalies indicate a dormant shard shifting in stasis, an isolated technopathic event, or a localized convergence of myth and technology cannot be resolved solely from the feeds. What can be stated with confidence is that multiple, independent record systems, Necron logs, Eldari mythic fragments, Mechanicus ritual annotations and human picked feeds converge on a recognizable pattern. That convergence is the starting point for the deeper archival, field, and analytical work that follows in subsequent parts of this study. The entity identified in Imperial records as the Void Dragon displays characteristics distinct from other surviving star gods, enough so that even fragmented as a shard, its influence manifests in observable and repeatable patterns. Scholars who compare signs of its presence across multiple millennia point to a consistent linkage between anomalous technological behavior and environments historically associated with its imprisonment. These patterns suggest that even in a diminished state, its fundamental nature is anchored to the manipulation of physical laws governing machinery, energy systems, and the theoretical boundary between synthetic life and non-sentient construction. The Void Dragon exhibits control that is not merely electromagnetic or computational in nature. Instead, the effect resembles an imposition of will on the underlying principles that allow technology to function. Devices exposed to its influence do not behave as though hacked, corrupted, or externally overridden. They behave as though cooperating with a higher authority that stands above conventional machine logic. For this reason, Mechanicus logicians frequently categorize Catan interference not as tech heresy, but as physics deviation, placing it in the same classification schema as warp anomalies, despite the Catan having no interaction with the Imperium. This contradiction remains one of the key frustrations for xenotech analysts attempting to measure the shard's capabilities using standard frameworks. Observational data from Necron activity suggests that the Void Dragon's abilities extend beyond passive disruption. Necron constructs operating under its proximity exhibit performance levels surpassing their usual battlefield metrics. This includes improved reaction time, enhanced target prioritization, and elevated energy efficiency in Gorse-based systems. These outcomes imply that the shard does not merely consume the essence of technology, but can optimize it, reshaping mechanical performance with the same ease other entities manipulate biological tissue. To the Necron dynasties, this effect is considered a divine reinforcement. To Imperial observers, it represents an unacceptable breach of the principle that machines must obey predictable laws. Weapon signatures linked to the Void Dragon retain the hallmark Catan effect of reality shearing power, yet field records indicate a unique emphasis on energy transmutation. Instead of simply destroying matter, its strikes frequently rearrange energy dispersal patterns in ways that destabilize shielding, force fields, and plasma containment alike. This has led to the informal classification of its offensive output as technophage weaponry, a designation describing armaments that feed on the operational integrity of opposing systems. Necron wargear associated with the shard appears deliberately adapted to complement this process, allowing battlefield constructs to harvest excess energy from collapsing enemy technology and redirect it into their own systems. Unlike the Nightbringer, whose manifestations are consistently predatory, or the Deceiver, who operates within psychological domains, the Void Dragon's presence is silent and systematic. Structures exposed to its aura trend toward restored order and precision as though reclaimed by an overarching design principle. Mechanicus expeditions to areas suspected of containing the shard's influence typically report the same phenomenon. Machine spirits rendered placid, systems displaying unprecedented stability, and previously unreliable relic tech achieving near theoretical efficiency. To the priesthood of Mars, these reports are simultaneously awe-inspiring and deeply destabilizing. They imply that the Mechanicum's understanding of machinery is incomplete, and that an external entity holds mastery over the very discipline the priesthood claims as its sacred domain. Some accounts describe a phenomenon in which the shard's presence induces a conceptual alignment across multiple machines. This effect is not easily categorized, as it does not follow standard quantum entanglement models, nor does it behave like a distributed network or wireless data exchange. Instead, technology exposed to the shard appears capable of coordinated operation without direct interconnection. Devices share functions, synchronize behaviors, and respond as though integrated into a single logic structure. Necron lords consider this an extension of the shard's original divine role, in which it embodied universal technological order. Adeptus Mechanicus researchers note that such coordination bypasses physical interfaces entirely, violating every known limitation on machine-to-machine communication. The Void Dragon's ability to repair damage extends beyond conventional restoration. Necron constructs that receive its direct attention show evidence of reconfigured architecture, structures rebuilt not according to their original patterns, but according to improved schematics that no known engineer designed. This implies that the shard retains original Catan-level creativity, capable of altering technological entities in ways that increase their longevity, efficiency, and destructive potential. Such reconstructions appear mathematically optimized, suggesting not artistic reinterpretation, but precise adherence to an ideal mechanical form. No recorded instance shows these enhancements diminishing over time, indicating that repairs performed under the shard's influence are permanent. Its defensive capabilities function according to principles observed nowhere else in the Necron arsenal. Energies directed at the shard do not dissipate, reflect, or become absorbed in a conventional sense. Instead, they vanish from measurable existence, with some reports suggesting partial reappearance elsewhere in altered form. This behavior has prompted theories that the Void Dragon's essence interacts with dimensions unavailable to standard cosmological analysis. If true, then the shard may divert incoming force into a technological substrate existing parallel to real space, from which it can later draw power. This hypothesis remains unconfirmed due to the lack of consistent repeatable data, as no Imperial force has survived long enough in its immediate presence to perform controlled measurements. Imperial reports obtained from fragments of AdMech archives reference energy distortions described as self-negating fields, areas where technology ceases to operate not from overload or corruption, but from erasure of the underlying mechanisms that allow function. These zones resemble localized null-tech fields in which the laws governing electrical flow, magnetic resonance, and material conductivity lose coherence. The effect is not destructive in a traditional sense. Instead, technology simply fails to meet the conditions required to function. Even high-level Mechanicus encryption rituals, traditionally reliable under extreme duress, have recorded systemic collapse in such areas. This suggests that the shard can impose a form of technological entropy, selectively suppressing the fundamental properties that machines rely upon. The shard's movement across a battlefield does not resemble conventional locomotion. Necron constructs escorting it frequently adopt protective formations not to defend it, but to regulate the surrounding environment so that lesser units can survive proximity. Necron warforms too simple or too outdated have been documented disintegrating, not from attack, but from inability to withstand the shard's resonance. This indicates that the Void Dragon's presence emits a field that harmonizes with advanced or properly phased machinery, while destabilizing primitive, impure or inconsistent systems. As such, it serves as an evolutionary filter for technology, reinforcing systems that adhere to its ideal of mechanical perfection while dissolving those that fall short. Historical patterns across Necron dynasties suggest that technologies with origins tied to the Void Dragon prioritize self-correction. Devices suspected to incorporate fragments of its essence exhibit autonomic regulatory behavior. They redirect energy away from instability, resolve computational contradictions before they propagate, and restore structural weaknesses through matter reconfiguration. This stands in stark contrast to standard Necron machinery, which follows rigid, predefined patterns. The distinction is subtle but consistent, establishing a framework for identifying constructs influenced by the Shard even when their external design appears conventional. Weapons associated with the Void Dragon display a signature effect in which targets undergo progressive technological collapse after impact. Instead of immediate destruction, systems degrade in sequential stages, first losing fine control, then experiencing energy depletion, and finally suffering irreversible structural failure. This differs from standard Gorse weaponry, which strips matter layer by layer. The technophage variant instead strips function layer by layer, unravelling operation before matter. The result is battlefield debris that shows no logical burn pattern, often prompting initial misclassification as sabotage or internal malfunction. For this reason, fragments from Void Dragon engagements are highly sought after by the Ordo Xenos for study and strict containment. The Void Dragon's capacity to manipulate metallic and energetic constructs appears linked to its original identity before fragmentation. Ancient Necron inscriptions depict it as an embodiment of technological sovereignty, an entity for whom machinery was not a tool but an extension of existence. Though modern interpreters must rely on imperfect translations, the prevailing view is that the Void Dragon represents the absolute form of mechanical dominance, binding technology to its will through principles incomprehensible to biological civilizations. This framework aligns with all observed data. Its presence enforces order on machinery, its weapons exploit technological structure at fundamental levels, and its defensive capabilities operate in accordance with unknown but precise mechanical laws. Even in Shard state, the Void Dragon demonstrates behavioral consistency across encounters, suggesting that its core essence remains stable. Unlike the Deceiver, whose shards vary widely in personality and method, or the Nightbringer, whose fragments display differing degrees of predatory fixation, the Void Dragon maintains an unchanging directive: the enforcement of technological supremacy. This directive manifests as both constructive and destructive force. It constructs when technology aligns with its principles and destroys when it does not. This binary behavior has become a reliable predictive tool for those attempting to track its movements within Necron space, though such predictions remain hazardous due to the limited scope of available data. Across multiple dynasties, the Void Dragon's shard is frequently accompanied by specialized Necron constructs adapted to support its operational requirements. These attendants serve not as protectors, but as stabilizing mechanisms, maintaining environmental conditions compatible with the shard's energy resonance. Their presence indicates that even the Necron view the shard as an entity requiring structured regulation, not due to vulnerability, but due to the danger it poses to its own forces when unrestrained. The consistency of these attendants across different dynasties implies a level of universal respect, if not outright fear, even among the nearly emotionless Necron leadership. Some records describe peculiar magnetic field behavior surrounding the shard, with fluctuations matching neither natural planetary patterns nor artificial generation. These fields appear to form geometric arrangements, suggesting intentional structuring rather than random distortion. The patterns resemble incomplete circuitry on a macro scale, as though the environment is transformed into a conceptual diagram of technological principles. Scholars theorize that the shard projects its internal logic outward, embedding its nature into surrounding space. This remains unconfirmed, though it aligns with reports of machines behaving as though integrated into a shared system near its presence. Across all documented evidence, the shard's defining characteristic remains its absolute mastery over technological function. Its influence transcends material construction, operational programming, and behavioral logic. It operates as though technology, in all its forms, is merely an expression of its own will, with machinery acting not as independent objects but as reflections of its identity. This perspective explains its dual capacity for enhancement and annihilation, as well as its consistent battlefield behavior. It does not choose targets based on strategic reasoning, but, according to principles of technological hierarchy, systems that align with its nature are elevated, systems that do not are forcibly corrected or eradicated. The entity known as the Void Dragon does not exhibit personality in any sense recognizable to biological observers. The term is used here only for convenience, as Imperial researchers routinely attempt to assign behavioral categories to the surviving Catan shards. In practice, its actions display patterns so consistent and so detached from emotional fluctuation that describing them as personality traits risks misleading interpretation. The shard behaves according to unchanging principles that appear to form the core of its essence, indicating that what might be mistaken for temperament is instead the expression of a universal directive rooted in its original, unshattered state. The Void Dragon acts through a framework of technological dominance, operating as though the galaxy is divided into two categories: systems that align with its inherent order and systems that violate it. This binary classification is present in every recorded behavior, from battlefield conduct to passive environmental influence. When confronted with machinery of sufficiently advanced sophistication, it demonstrates patterns resembling approval, expressed through optimization and integration. Machinery considered inferior or structurally inconsistent is subjected to destabilization or outright annihilation. These tendencies suggest that the shard does not evaluate threats, opportunities, or moral considerations. It evaluates alignment to mechanical purity, a principle that seems fundamental to its existence. There is no evidence that the shard experiences curiosity, satisfaction, anger, or fear. Its behavioral stability across radically different encounters supports the hypothesis that its personality is not a spectrum but a fixed axis. This distinguishes it sharply from other surviving Catan. The Deceiver displays manipulative preference. The Nightbringer displays predatory obsession. The Void Dragon displays none of these fluctuations. Instead, it operates as a constant, an expression of mechanical sovereignty that does not respond to environmental conditions so much as impose its nature upon them. Scholars from the Ordo Xenos note that this makes the shard more predictable than its kin, though no less dangerous due to the scale at which its influence can propagate. The rarity of direct manifestations complicates any attempt to interpret its internal state. Unlike the Nightbringer, which frequently expresses itself through anthropomorphic forms, or the Deceiver, which uses mimicry to interact with other species, the Void Dragon remains fundamentally alien. It communicates, if it communicates at all, through changes in technological behavior. Machines entering its sphere of influence react as though receiving instruction from an unseen source, and this interaction forms the closest thing to dialogue the shard appears capable of. Whether this represents deliberate communication or simply the unavoidable consequence of its presence remains unknown. Necron dynasties categorize the shard not as a leader but as a universal resource. It does not participate in strategic deliberation, nor does it issue commands in any conventional sense. Instead, its alignment with Necron civilization derives from shared principles. Necron constructs embody ordered mechanical function. The shard represents technological order in its purest form. This mutual compatibility ensures cooperation without the need for hierarchy, instruction, or allegiance in the traditional sense. For this reason, the shard is not treated as a political or military figure within Necron society. It is regarded as an elemental force, a foundational constant within the Necron worldview, comparable to a cosmological law rather than an individual entity. Dynasties that possess the privilege or burden of guarding Void Dragon shards maintain specialized infrastructure designed not to empower the entity, but to regulate the effects of its presence. These structures vary by dynasty, but share consistent features: resonance dampening chambers, geometric field harmonizers, and containment pylons that prevent the shard's influence from destabilizing lesser Necron units. This indicates that the Necron do not consider the shard an obedient weapon but a phenomenon that must be managed. Their relationship functions more like coexistence with an uncontrollable, stellar event than subservience to a superior. Even their highest-ranking cryptechs treat the shard with procedural caution. There is no recorded instance in which the shard acted in defiance of Necron interests, though this should not be mistaken for loyalty. The shard simply does not evaluate alliances the way sentient species do. Its cooperation with Necron dynasties arises because Necron machinery is the only technological substrate capable of maintaining structural integrity in its presence. Human, Eldar and Orc constructions lack the precision required to survive long-term exposure. As a result, the shard's alignment is not political but mechanical. It functions within Necron civilization because no other civilization can accommodate it. Across multiple investigations, the Order Xenos has struggled to define whether the shard perceives biological life as significant. Observational data suggest that organic entities are functionally invisible to it, except when they obstruct or disrupt technological structures. When organic life is destroyed in the shard's vicinity, the event appears incidental rather than intentional, in the same way that atmospheric pressure variations crush organisms without malice. The shard recognizes only the existence of order, the structure of technology, and the violation of that structure. Anything else is a byproduct of the interaction between its nature and the surrounding environment. Attempts to classify its threat level have produced contradictory results. In one sense, the shard is less immediately destructive than its kin because it does not pursue prey or manipulate opponents. In another sense, it is far more dangerous because its presence alone can destabilize entire technological ecosystems. A concentrated manifestation in a densely populated industrial environment could initiate cascading collapse across infrastructure vital to planetary survival. Its destructive potential does not scale according to traditional military metrics. Instead, it scales according to the density of machinery present. The more advanced and widespread the technology, the more severe the consequences of its emergence. Long-term analysis across multiple millennia reveals a consistent pattern in its behavior. The shard moves according to phenomena that remain poorly understood, and dynastic records indicate that its periods of activity correspond to intervals of galactic technological escalation. These correlations suggest, but do not conclusively prove, that the shard responds to increases in complexity across the broader technological landscape. Whether it seeks to regulate these developments, feed on them, or restore an idealized mechanical order is unknown. What is certain is that its emergence is never random. The shard appears in locations where technology has reached critical density, or where Necron dynasties find it advantageous to reinforce important constructs. There is no credible evidence supporting the more dramatic Imperial myths regarding its imprisonment on Mars. These stories likely originate from early misunderstandings of the Necron and the C'tan, combined with ancient Terran mythological motifs that were retroactively mapped onto incomplete Mechanicus texts. While these legends persist among the lower ranks of the priesthood, higher-level magi have long acknowledged that the geographic and chronological inconsistencies render the theory untenable. Nonetheless, the persistence of these myths demonstrates the degree to which the shard's nature resonates with the Mechanicus imagination. It represents a technological ideal taken to an extreme that the priesthood both admires and fears. The strongest conclusion that can be drawn from all available records is that the shard embodies the principle of absolute mechanical superiority. Its actions are not governed by emotion, motivation, or strategy, but by adherence to a fundamental concept, the enforcement of a perfect technological order. This principle governs its interactions with Necron constructs, defines its influence on alien machinery, and shapes its behavior across every recorded encounter. It does not adapt or evolve. It does not respond to persuasion or threat. It simply exists in accordance with the cosmic role it once inhabited fully, now fragmented but still potent. The larger implication for the galaxy is that the shard represents an active force within ongoing technological evolution. Its presence, even limited, serves as both a stabilizing and destabilizing agent depending on the civilization involved. For the Necron, it restores elements of their lost perfection. For the Imperium, it undermines the already fragile balance between archaic machinery and ritual maintenance. For all other species, it introduces uncertainty into the relationship between biological intent and mechanical function. The shard's existence challenges the assumption that technology is a neutral tool. In its presence, technology becomes a domain governed by an external intelligence, one that predates every empire now using the machines it quietly observes. In final analysis, the Void Dragon should not be understood as an enemy, ally, deity, or machine. It should be understood as a governing principle that once shaped the galaxy's technological foundation. Its shard form no longer possesses the totality of that influence, but the fragment that survives is sufficient to alter the behavior of entire technological systems. It operates with the single-minded consistency of a cosmological constant, reasserting mechanical order wherever it manifests. To the Necron, it is a remnant of their ancient divinity. To the Imperium, it is a threat to the predictability of their technology. To the galaxy at large, it is a reminder that the foundations of modern civilization rest atop forces far older and far more absolute than any contemporary species understands. There is an underlying tension in all official Mechanicus records relating to the entity referred to as the Dragon of Mars. In less formal circles, some tech priests explicitly equate this being with the Void Dragon, one of the few surviving star gods of the Catan. This identification remains controversial even within the Mechanicus and is not universally accepted. According to tradition preserved among certain high-ranking adepts, the Emperor of Mankind subdued the Void Dragon in antiquity and bound it beneath the surface of Mars, specifically within the subterranean labyrinth known as Noctis Labyrinthus. Over centuries, this being, the Dragon, is believed to have influenced the Martian culture, eventually becoming the spiritual cornerstone of the cult Mechanicus worship of the machine god, often referred to as the Omnissiah, the divine figure to which all technology and scientific worship is directed. For many within the lower or middle echelons of the cult, the machine god is understood purely as a metaphysical principle or divine archetype, embodied partially by the God Emperor. For them, the narratives tying the machine god to a slumbering alien star god remain myth, speculation, or apocryphal legend. But among some ancient sects, especially those with access to restricted archives or oral tradition passed down since pre-imperial times, the identification of the machine god with the Void Dragon is treated as more than allegory. In those circles, the Dragon of Mars is considered a real, sentient, or at least conscious, being whose dormant presence nourishes the technological faith of Mars. Given the ambiguous nature of the evidence and the wide spectrum of belief inside the Mechanicus, logistical findings and analytics related to the Void Dragon remain fragmentary, deeply classified, or censored. What leaks into permissible records are typically limited to anomalous technological observations, references to archaic dragon myth dossiers, or cryptic crosses between Necron incursions and increased ritual activity on Mars. One of the few documented incidents that fuels continued speculation involves a risky assault in 998 millennia 41, during which 5 Necron Shroud-class light cruisers breached the defences of Mars and made a suicidal rush toward the Noctis Labyrinthus. This military action, viewed by many within the Mechanicus as too reckless to be purely tactical, triggered renewed internal debate over the stability of the entity imprisoned beneath the red sands. Some adepts took this as confirmation that a shard or fragment of the Void Dragon still lies there, and that the constructions of the labyrinth may conceal more than just old data vaults or ancient forges. Within Mechanicus log file vaults, there are recurring annotations referencing unusual energy signatures and resonance fluctuations in certain restricted sublevels of Martian forges. These annotations are rarely made public, and decrypted extracts describe them in ritualistic language, often metaphoric, referring to the stirring of the ancient Forge Lord beneath the sands. Some analysts interpret this as metaphorical spiritual language consistent with the cult's theology. Others, more pragmatically inclined, suspect that these entries encode detection of weak, residual Catan energy, or perhaps a dormant shard's subtle radiations. Despite the weight of speculative interpretations, no verified, unambiguous detection of a Catan shard on Mars has been released to the wider Imperium. No datasheet, Codex Appendix, or public Mechanicus chronicle confirms definitively that the Void Dragon resides on Mars or that the cult's machine god is an alien star god. The subject remains one of the deepest institutional secrets. Nevertheless, inside specialized research lodges, typically located on Mars or isolated Forge worlds, there are mathematical models and log simulations that attempt to reconcile the peculiar legend of the dragon with measurable anomalies. These models track correlations over millennia, surges in rediscovered STC-derived technologies, bursts of unlockable cybernetic breakthroughs, shifts in metallurgical yield, and occasional unexplained malfunctions that cannot be traced to human error or Xenos sabotage. Some analysts privately note that these spikes and troughs bear statistical resemblance to the concept of a dormant, reactive core influencing technological entropy and technological faith output, though by design, the models omit explicit reference to the Void Dragon, instead using placeholders like X signal, source unknown, or prime template. Because of the potential institutional risk, both ideological and practical, few of these studies have survived intact. Many versions are cleaned up during routine audits. Others are archived in cold storage within off-grid Magos operatives who keep their findings unregistered. As such, modern scholars outside the inner circle of the Mechanicus treat these analytics as unverified, though intriguing footnotes of history. From the perspective of the Adeptus Administratum, the implications of any confirmation that the Void Dragon is real, active, or partially active under Mars are significant. The Administratum depends heavily on the stability of Mars as the Imperium's primary manufacturing base. Forges, navy yards, supply chains, STC archiving, and technological maintenance all rely on predictable output from Mars. If the Dragon's dormant energies were to destabilize, the consequences could ripple across entire sectors. Production delays, catastrophic weapon failures, data corruption, even mass mechanical breakdown. For that reason, many high-ranking clerks quietly flagged the subject as one of the few internal matters worthy of emergency supply status, meaning that, in certain codified scenarios, access to Mars production could be restricted or shut down until a proper security assessment was completed. Some in the Administratum advanced contingency plans, relocation of critical STC vaults, distribution of vital production to peripheral Forge worlds, cross-checking of warp drive circuitry against unusual energy signature logs, and the institution of monitoring protocols for Martian forges tied to services beyond purely military supply, such as civilian industrial output. These plans remain unactivated, precisely because none of the anomalies have ever been publicly confirmed, but they continue to exist in classified bureaucratic files. At the level of inter-organization analytics, the Mechanicus and Administratum share overlapping protocols. Any major shift in energy emissions, unexplained power surges, sudden architectural stress within Martian forges, or anomalous shifts in machine spirit behavior triggers a joint operative review. These reviews are coded but rarely reach the desk of even senior Inquisition officers. On rare occasions, when external audits were attempted, records were lost or reclassified under impersonal labels. The result is a de facto silence. Anomalies are acknowledged internally, but publicly the official line remains unchanged. Mars is stable, its forges operational, the machine god abstract. Given the secrecy and the fragmentary nature of the records, what emerges from the Mechanicus Administratum perspective is less a firm conclusion than a hypothesis under tentative maintenance, that the Void Dragon, or a shard of it, is real, that its presence beneath Mars might have shaped human technological evolution, and that current anomalies might be residual echoes of its power. For some within the Mechanicus, this hypothesis has become a quiet belief, maintained through arcane ritual and cautious observation. For others, especially in the administratum, the same hypothesis represents a risk factor to be managed, but not publicly acknowledged. To contemporary scholars external to the cult Mechanicus, the evidence remains circumstantial, often myth-tainted and possibly misinterpreted. Yet, precisely because of that mixture of institutional faith, rumour, speculation, and occasional anomalous data, the legend persists. It occupies a grey zone, not officially confirmed, not officially denied, stored behind encrypted vaults, redacted logs, and the drifting fog of superstition and coded bureaucracy. The difficulty in assembling any series of confirmed encounters involving the Void Dragon lies in a simple institutional constraint. No imperial organ, whether military or administrative, has ever released a formal classification identifying the being as an active participant in a battlefield event. Every episode that follows, including those preserved in the corrupted or incomplete archives of the Adeptus Mechanicus, is reconstructed from partial logs, conflicting testimonies, or post-action analyses drawn from machine spirit telemetry. In all cases, the subject's presence is inferred rather than directly observed, and no official document names the star god itself. Nevertheless, certain large-scale incidents show patterns consistent with the influence, activity, or objective targeting of the entity known in Mechanicus circles as the Dragon. The earliest reconstructed engagement associated with the Void Dragon predates the Imperium's rise. This pre-unification period conflict is almost entirely pieced together from xeno-archaeological notes preserved by the Forge Worlds of Estaban, Storn, and Lucius. In these vaults, engraved data slates record that Magladroth, the being later known as the Void Dragon, participated in the ancient wars against the Necrontyrs' Catan rivals and the material worlds they sought to dominate. Ancient Necron inscriptions describe the dragon as a being of annihilating technological mastery, capable of unmaking entire war machines not through heat, impact, or gravitational distortion, but through the controlled collapse of their structural logic. The records depict battlefields where armoured columns folded into themselves without evidence of kinetic force, energy weapons that ceased operational function mid-discharge, and complex engines reduced to inert sculptures of fused metal. These accounts do not describe casualties in the conventional sense. Instead, they depict vast regions of technological silence, where machinery of any kind failed to operate as if its underlying coherence had been stripped away. While these accounts originate from a period far removed from Imperial memory, the Mechanicus has long maintained a private interest in them. Analysts within the xenobiology's branch have quietly suggested that such descriptions may represent the closest available approximation of the being's combat behaviour. If accurate, they reveal a fundamental characteristic of the entity. It does not destroy through brute force, but through the direct manipulation of physical, computational, and energetic principles that underlie the operation of machinery. No known material, no matter its density or reinforcement, appears immune once targeted. In the few archives that discuss this behaviour openly, the phenomenon is described as an imposition of the dragon's technological supremacy upon the material world. It is not a weapon in the traditional sense, but a state of reality reshaped according to the being's nature. This form of engagement is indirectly cited in one of the most controversial incidents involving Mars during the early formation of the Imperium. According to obscure sources within the Noctis Forge, a confrontation took place between the Emperor and a being believed to be the Void Dragon. The details are fragmentary. Surviving accounts note that large regions of the Martian surface experienced momentary energy collapse, and several ancient forges recorded mass stoppages of machinery, including cooling reactors and monitoring apparatus capable of functioning independently of grid systems. The abnormalities lasted minutes but caused enough disruption to damage entire arcology districts. The battle itself is never directly described in any surviving Martian archive. The closest reference appears in a deliberately vague administratum correction note filed during the early days of the Martian Compact, which mentions localized seismic disturbances and unexpected interference patterns from unknown sources. Despite the lack of clarity, this remains one of the rare events where the dragon's presence intersects with verified Imperial history. Another major engagement tied to the dragon appears much later, in the closing centuries of the 41st millennium, when a Necron fleet launched the unexpected assault toward the Noctis Labyrinthus. The breach by Shroud-class vessels remains one of the only recorded incidents in which Necron forces prioritized a target on Mars itself. The attack pattern did not resemble a conventional military strategy. The vessels were not configured to destroy Martian infrastructure nor to seize orbital command. Instead, their flight path suggested an objective deep beneath the planetary crust. They ignored primary defense stations, bypassed several automated weapon platforms, and maintained a direct trajectory toward the Labyrinthus region. Though the Mechanicus repelled the assault before any significant ground incursion occurred, numerous observers noted irregularities in the behavior of Necron constructs. Telemetry captured from early warning platforms documented instantaneous recalibrations within the Necron fleet, as if receiving signals or coordinates from a source embedded below the surface. Furthermore, fragments from destroyed Shroud craft demonstrated energy frequency patterns rarely observed in Necron materials. Some Tecmagos interpreters propose that the Necrons may have been attempting to locate or destabilize the prison of a Khitan shard. Others speculated that the ships were attempting a form of communion or signal synchronization rather than a recovery operation. No definitive conclusion was recorded, yet the rapid and determined trajectory of the vessels remains one of the strongest cases for the Void Dragon's influence, provoking strategic interest among modern Necron dynasties. In the aftermath of this incident, the Mechanicus conducted a series of internal war simulations to model potential battle scenarios should the entity ever awaken, or if Necron forces attempted retrieval in greater number. These simulations, normally used only for predicting civilizational failures or Forge World collapse events, shared consistent results across thousands of iterations. If the Dragon were to regain even partial operational capacity within the planetary core, Mars would likely experience catastrophic technological distortion. Historical Mechanicus thinking divides such potential effects into several classes. The first involves the collapse of machine spirit integrity across large regions of the Forge system, resulting in sudden shutdowns of reactors, manufactoria, and atmospheric processors. The second involves cascading logical corruption of cogitation engines, resulting in unpredictable or hostile behavior from key processing systems. The third, considered the least likely but most devastating, involves the direct disassembly of planetary infrastructure on a molecular scale, creating zones where technology cannot function at all. These simulations appear to incorporate accounts of the Dragon's ancient fighting style, which emphasizes indirect influence over direct engagement. The entity does not simply strike, it imposes a higher order of technological authority, such that every machine, from the smallest servo to the largest starship, becomes subject to its will. In battle, this manifests as controlled reconfiguration of metal, disruption of power, and interference with the fundamental logic of engineered systems. Any war in which such a being participates ceases to be fought with conventional weapons. Instead, the battlefield becomes a contest of systemic integrity, with the Dragon asserting dominance over the very concept of machinery. One of the few conflicts in which this theoretical influence may have manifested indirectly involved the Forge world of Tyrannus. During a Necron incursion targeting pre-Imperial infrastructure beneath its surface, Knight households reported large-scale disruptions to their chassis systems. Knight reactors entered cycles of instability without apparent mechanical failure, and several suits recorded machine spirit distress uncommon even during catastrophic battlefield trauma. In many cases, the Knights behaved as if trying to resist an unseen force, attempting to claim operational control. Logs from this event, although incomplete, contain references to energy readings loosely matching those found in much older Dragon-associated archives. While the Mechanicus refrained from issuing any official conclusion, the similarities led some analysts to theorize that the incursion may have involved a lesser fragment of the Dragon or a resonant energy form seeking alignment with a distant source. If true, it would mark one of the rare situations where the dragon's influence manifested beyond Mars. Another relevant case concerns the Eltrax campaign, a conflict involving a dormant Necron installation on the fringes of Imperial territory. During exploratory breaches into its central chambers, a Mechanicus delegation discovered a containment array consistent with Catan shard technology. The array was inactive, but portions of its surface displayed energetic scarring identical to earlier records attributed to the dragon's destructive emissions. During the battle, several Imperial engines of war shut down simultaneously without overt cause. Their power cores did not overload. Instead, they simply ceased operational coherence, as if the fundamental instructions governing their systems were erased. When the Necron crypt awoke during the breach, its initial defense patterns seemed erratic and unfocused, leading some to speculate that the mechanisms had been damaged long ago by a being of considerable power. If the damage was inflicted by the Void Dragon during the Ancient Wars, it stands as one more indirect indicator of the entity's combat potential. Within these engagements, the consistent through-line is that conventional battlefield analysis fails to capture the full picture. The dragon's fighting style appears to transcend material engagement. It is not bound by trajectory, range, or rate of fire. Rather than delivering destructive energy, it alters the underlying rules on which technological constructs depend. This is supported by internal Mechanicus studies, referencing the dragon as a being of ordered perfection, defined by the absolute domination of physical and computational logic. In every recorded or theorized battle, the environment changes not through visible force, but through sudden and irreversible shifts in technological function. This distinguishes the dragon from all known combatants, including other Catan shards. Certain internal Mechanicus records model hypothetical direct combat scenarios between the dragon and modern Imperial forces. These simulations assume various activation levels, from partial cognitive reawakening to full recovery of the entity's pre-shattering capabilities. Across all versions, results show minimal survivability for any force relying on armoured support, energy weapons, or mechanical augmentation. Even Astartes forces fare no better, as their wargear depends heavily on technological consistency. Only primitive weaponry and low-technology forces show resistance to these distortions, although their limited combat efficacy renders such resistance irrelevant. These findings remain sealed due to their demoralizing implications. Within this context, one surprising feature of the dragon's recorded or inferred activity is its apparent restraint. Even in incidents where its influence is suspected, effects are localized or momentary. This leads to two primary interpretations within Mechanicus theoretical circles. The first suggests that the dragon's current state remains severely diminished, either due to sharding, imprisonment, or suppression by the Emperor. The second suggests that the being exerts limited influence deliberately, maintaining minimal output to avoid revealing its full capabilities. In either case, the rarity of battlefield events attributed to the dragon is notable, given its historical reputation for sweeping annihilation. These considerations tie directly into one final conflict sometimes associated with the dragon, the great sleep and awakening of the Necrons. Some Mechanicus theorists argue that when the Necrons began their gradual reactivation, subtle energy fluctuations were detected deep within Martian substrata, as if the dragon responded unconsciously to the awakening of its ancient adversaries. A series of minute anomalies recorded during this period, including sudden oscillations in power output from deep forge reactors and strange deviations in data crypt encryption patterns, were later dismissed as coincidence. Yet among certain confined circles, these anomalies are interpreted as evidence that the dragon's dormant awareness flickered briefly in response to changes across the galaxy. If true, it would indicate that the dragon remains connected to broad-scale cosmic networks involving other Catan shards. Across all these engagements, ancient or modern, confirmed or hypothesized, the unifying element is the same. The Void Dragon does not participate in war as other entities do. It does not favor direct confrontation. Its presence is measured through systemic distortion, the collapse of machine integrity, and the imposition of its own conceptual domain. any battlefield touched by the dragon becomes a space where technological certainty fails and the fundamental relationship between matter, energy, and engineered design is rewritten. From the perspective of the Adeptus Mechanicus and Administratum analysts attempting to catalogue these conflicts, the dragon represents not a combatant, but a phenomenon. Every incident, whether involving Necron incursions, ancient battlefields, or unexplained mechanical collapse, supports the idea that its fighting style is not physical but ontological. It asserts a form of dominance over technology that, if ever fully realised, would render traditional warfare irrelevant. No number of warriors, engines, or defensive networks can counter an entity capable of overriding the principles upon which those systems operate. In the absence of direct confirmation, Mechanicus traditions continue to treat these conflicts as historical curiosities, theoretical exercises, or esoteric myths. However, the data fragments collected from these battles, together with the behavioural patterns observed in Necron activity, form a growing body of evidence suggesting that the Void Dragon remains a strategic concern. Even dormant, the entity influences the behaviour of other factions, drives Necron forces into reckless or targeted assaults, and destabilizes isolated war zones. Though rarely mentioned, its shadow appears repeatedly in the records of technological catastrophe or unexplained battlefield anomalies. Thus, for the Adeptus Mechanicus, every war involving technological distortion becomes a case study, a potential indicator that the star god beneath Mars may not be entirely silent. These incidents do not provide certainty, but the accumulation of patterns, subtle, recurring, and uncomfortably consistent, drives the analysis of those who continue to examine the dragon's legacy. In each conflict, even when the entity remains unseen, its defining signature persists. A war where machines no longer obey their makers, where logic fails, and where the battlefield becomes an extension of a being whose mastery over technology is absolute. The broader Imperial record holds only fragments regarding additional conflicts associated with the entity later identified as the Void Dragon. But the fragments that do exist form a pattern that Imperial analysts have long acknowledged as statistically abnormal. Each fragment describes engagements in which Imperial forces reported technological outages, spontaneous machine failures, or unexplained combat effectiveness loss against opponents whose descriptions align with early Necron constructs. While none explicitly reference the dragon itself, the Administratum and Mechanicus treat these fragments as indirect indicators of the dragon's presence, or at least its influence, radiating through the wider Necron command hierarchy. A series of sealed Terran archives recount a conflict occurring near the outer reaches of the Ghoul stars during millennia 36. Imperial vessels sent to survey the region reported encountering unmapped metallic structures rising from barren planetoids, each structurally similar to the geometric patterns now definitively attributed to Necron tomb complexes. In one of these deployments, a cruiser experienced total machine spirit shutdown within moments of entering orbit. Surviving officers recorded that the vessel fell into a silent drift without alarms, warnings, or feedback from its systems. Power returned only after the ship's orbit decayed enough to begin atmospheric entry. The effect was later classified as consistent with what Mechanicus scholars term a technopathic suppression field, a phenomenon they believe originates in Catan activity or Catan-derived technologies. Since the dragon is the Catan most associated with control of machinery, some speculate that the suppression field was either a residual effect of the dragon's actions or part of a defensive array connected to its distant influence. The Mechanicus ultimately marked the region as hazardous and recommended strict avoidance without further comment. Another Imperial record from the distant Katak system describes a conflict involving a Mechanicus exploratory fleet investigating a dormant orbital ring of unknown origin. The structure exhibited design elements matching those found in older Necron ruins: smooth metallic surfaces lacking rivets, interlocking geometric plates, and energy conduits operating without visible power sources. When the fleet initiated boarding operations, several tech priests on the lead vessel, experienced sudden neural overloads caused by unidentifiable data surges transmitted through their implants. The fleet logs described these surges as machine language instructions far more advanced than anything in Mechanicus databanks. The survivors reported hearing structured code sequences transmitted directly into their cortical nodes. Administratum historians later correlated these descriptions with older stories, claiming that the dragon could communicate using purely mathematical constructs, bypassing physical speech entirely. While the dragon itself was not present, the event was considered a sign of systems designed through its principles. The same conflict escalated rapidly when Necron constructs emerged from hidden recesses inside the orbital ring, forcing the Mechanicus vessels into retreat. Combat logs show that the constructs targeted ship engines and reactors with exceptional precision, disabling vessels without destroying them. Mechanicus analysts believe that this behavior indicates programming derived from the Dragon's strategic doctrine, which traditionally focuses on exploiting technomantic superiority rather than brute destruction. It is believed that these constructs acted according to a template originating in the Dragon's ancient designs. The orbital ring was ultimately destroyed to prevent further incursions, but the data fragments retrieved from it became major reference points in later Dragon-related research. Another event frequently examined by Imperial scholars involves the disappearance of a Mechanicus outpost on the desert world Lysiardi during millennia 39. The outpost had been established to investigate a metallic spire uncovered by shifting sands. Initial reports described its surface as composed of unknown alloys resistant to all scanning methods. Tech priests attempted to probe it manually, but recorded moments of involuntary motor control loss when approaching its base. Within 2 days, the outpost ceased transmitting entirely. A follow-up Imperial patrol found no remains of personnel or equipment. The spire itself had vanished, leaving a perfectly smooth depression where it once stood. This event mirrored several others occurring around the galaxy, where structures of presumed Necron origin appeared and disappeared without trace. Mechanicus archivists later compared the Lysiad spire to architectural designs discovered beneath Olympus Mons on Mars, where the dragon had been imprisoned. Both exhibited the same stylistic geometry, energy conduction properties, and unnatural material resilience. Some Mechanicus magi argue that the Lysiad spire may have been a remote conduit or sensor array linked to the dragon's wider network, activated prior to the Necron awakening. Since the Lysiad event preceded the known Necron re-emergence by centuries, this remains unconfirmed, but the similarities are significant enough that the Adeptus Mechanicus lists the event as a probable dragon-associated phenomenon. The aftermath of each of these conflicts contributed to growing Mechanicus anxiety surrounding the nature of Catan technomancy. Even before the reawakening of Necron dynasties became widely known, the Mechanicus had observed enough anomalies to infer that a being or entities existed with the ability to override machine spirits at will. These concerns intensified when the Necron reawakening began in earnest, and confirmed the existence of star gods once thought mythical. While the Void Dragon was still imprisoned on Mars during these periods, its influence appeared detectable in the tactical methodologies exhibited by Necron constructs encountered across multiple sectors. Administratum battle records from early engagements during millennia 41 demonstrate this clearly. One report from the Jericho Reach details a battle in which Adeptus Astartes forces fought against Necron legions employing anti-vehicle tactics with a level of precision not typically observed in other Xenos. Data from that engagement shows that Necron units coordinated their fire to disable all mechanized assets before switching to infantry suppression. Mechanicus scholars studying these records remarked that this pattern reflected an innate understanding of machine vulnerabilities so profound that it transcended battlefield analytics. They argued that such methodologies could be traced to the teachings or influence of the dragon, whose mastery over technological systems was beyond any known being. Although speculative, this theory gained enough traction that Mechanicus research cohorts began treating Necron battlefield behavior as indirect expressions of the dragon's strategic legacy. Another battle record often cited by Mechanicus researchers comes from the Velox Corridor, where a small Imperial fleet encountered a Necron raiding force. When the fleets engaged, several Imperial vessels reported spontaneous shutdowns of their plasma drives. Inspections after the battle revealed no physical damage. Mechanicus investigators noted that the shutdowns occurred simultaneously across multiple vessels, suggesting an external influence targeting machine spirits. While the Dragon was still physically confined on Mars, historians argue that Necron technology itself often carries embedded protocols originally devised by the Dragon. If the Necron force employed such technology, the effect would not require the Dragon's direct involvement. Some Mechanicus magi speculate that Necron ships may carry dormant fragments of the Dragon's psychic or technomantic presence, though this remains unproven due to lack of direct access to Necron warships. The aftermath of these engagements consistently demonstrates the same pattern. Imperial forces often fail to retrieve functioning samples of Necron technology. Either the constructs self-destruct, collapse into inert dust, or deactivate in ways that prevent disassembly. Mechanicus researchers believe this is intentional. Many propose that Necron technology contains built-in failsafes created to prevent study or replication. These failsafes may have originated in the Dragon's own engineering principles and were later incorporated into Necron technological doctrine. The inability to secure samples has significantly hindered Mechanicus' progress in understanding Catan-derived technologies. Administratum analysts reviewing long-term data concluded that battles associated with Necron forces tend to produce wider systemic consequences even when the Necrons are defeated. Industrial worlds exposed to Necron incursions frequently report lingering machine anomalies, unexplained data corruption, or the spontaneous disappearance of archived records. These phenomena are rare but recurring enough that the Administratum categorizes them as Dragon-associated anomalies. While the Dragon's presence is not confirmed in these cases, the association remains because the anomalies involve machine behavior beyond conventional Imperial understanding. In the centuries following the Dragon's release from its Martian confinement, these anomalies increased in frequency across Necron war zones. However, they no longer appear random. Mechanicus magi argue that the Dragon's awakening likely amplified residual technomantic signatures throughout Necron networks. Although Imperial forces have never directly observed the Dragon during these battles, its influence is inferred through the increasing sophistication of Necron battlefield coordination. Data from more recent conflicts shows Necron constructs adapting within seconds to new threats, countering Imperial strategies before they fully develop. Mechanicus scholars believe this adaptability echoes the Dragon's preternatural understanding of mechanical systems and optimization processes. A significant aftermath documented by both Administratum and Mechanicus sources concerns the psychological impact on tech priests exposed to Necron technologies. Individuals who interacted with Necron devices often reported intrusive streams of machine language code appearing in their vision despite no external interface. These experiences sometimes led to permanent cognitive disruptions. Some Mechanicus factions argue that these symptoms indicate a faint psychic imprint left by the Dragon within Necron systems, acting like a residual echo of its consciousness. This theory remains speculative but is widely discussed among Mechanicus circles due to recurring anecdotal evidence. The Administratum, in contrast, takes a more procedural perspective. Its records focus on population losses, planetary infrastructure damage, and the logistical burden of restoring industrial capacity after Necron assaults. Administratum officials note that worlds attacked by Necron forces often face far longer recovery times than those attacked by other Xenos. One explanation offered by Mechanicus analysts is that Necron weapons do not simply destroy infrastructure, they disrupt machinery on a fundamental level, degrading machine spirits and rendering equipment inert even after physical repairs are made. Administratum recovery reports show that such worlds require extensive Mechanicus intervention before productivity returns to acceptable levels. As Imperial understanding of the Dragon's nature grew, both institutions shifted their analytical models. Administratum historians increasingly adopted the position that the Dragon's influence extends beyond individual battles. Instead, They view the dragon as an underlying force shaping the strategies, technologies, and expansion behaviour of Necron dynasties. This interpretation does not require direct involvement, but treats the dragon as a foundational architect whose legacy permeates Necron systems. The Adeptus Mechanicus, meanwhile, incorporates the dragon into a more theological framework. They consider it a being whose mastery of machinery represents the pinnacle of technological evolution. As such, its influence is seen not as incidental, but as omnipresent within Necron constructs. Even after the dragon's departure from Mars, the Mechanicus regards every interaction with Necron technology as a potential pathway to understanding the dragon's engineering principles. However, this pursuit is carefully controlled, as leadership fears that studying Catan technologies too closely might risk exposing the Mechanicus to the dragon's manipulative tendencies. Records show several cases where research teams were disbanded after demonstrating signs of obsession with uncovering Catan's secrets. When assessing the final analysis from both institutional perspectives, several themes converge. The Administratum views the dragon primarily as a strategic threat whose influence complicates imperial logistics and military planning. Its presence, whether direct or residual, correlates with machine failures, system disruptions, and prolonged recovery periods. From the Administratum standpoint, the dragon represents an existential challenge not because of its physical actions, but because of its capacity to neutralize mechanized infrastructure across entire star systems. The Adeptus Mechanicus, in contrast, regards the dragon with a mixture of reverence and apprehension. They acknowledge its potential to elevate technological understanding, but also recognize the catastrophic danger posed by its mastery over machinery. Mechanicus' final analyses emphasize that the dragon embodies principles that defy imperial doctrine, challenging the very foundations of the cult Mechanicus. The dragon's awakening forces the Mechanicus to confront the limitations of their understanding of technology and the existence of a being whose knowledge predates all human invention. Both institutions ultimately agree on one conclusion: whether through direct influence or through the systems and doctrines it established among the Necrons, the Void Dragon remains one of the most significant technological threats the Imperium has ever faced. Its mastery over machinery, its ability to suppress machine spirits, and its legacy embedded within Necron constructs ensure that its impact extends far beyond individual battles. For the Administratum, this means endless logistical complications. For the Mechanicus, it is a challenge to their knowledge, faith, and technological foundations. And for both, the dragon's existence signals an ongoing struggle with a force capable of reshaping the technological landscape of the galaxy. The earliest references to the entity later identified as the Void Dragon appear inside fragmented Inquisition dossiers preserved within sealed archives on Terra. These records are composed of interview transcripts, picked feed stills, recovered audio distortions, and fragmented intelligence from agents who never returned from their assignments. Much of the information is heavily redacted, often leaving only a few coherent lines, followed by long sections of censored material. Even in this incomplete form, the tone of these documents differs from the clinical distance typically found in Administratum or Mechanicus reports. Inquisition documents treat the subject not as a tactical threat or technological anomaly, but as a phenomenon that destabilizes the boundaries between material reality, machine cognition, and metaphysical influence. One of the oldest surviving reports concerns an agent investigating unexplained system failures on a mining world in the Helios Belt. The agent's final transmission describes drifting static within the Vox channel that seemed to reshape itself into rhythmically repeating patterns. The patterns did not match any known cipher and were not consistent with natural interference. When decoded using standard Inquisition pattern recognition, they revealed sequences resembling mathematical structures of extreme complexity. The agent noted that the structures were not meant to be interpreted by human cognition, a phrasing that appears in several later cases involving Necron technomantic phenomena. Moments after transmitting this report, the agent vanished. No biological traces were discovered inside the outpost, no signs of resistance were found, and no external breaches were detected. Inquisition analysts later compared this disappearance with similar vanishings near Necron tomb complexes, leading some to speculate that the entity's influence may extend through technomantic conduits capable of targeting individuals who attempt to interpret its transmissions. A separate investigation from Millennia 38 describes a case where an Inquisition vessel encountered an apparently derelict metallic structure drifting in deep space. The structure resisted all scans, and its geometry matched no known Xenos category at the time. When the vessel attempted to tow it using grav clamps, its machine spirits immediately entered a dormant state. Inquisition interrogators later documented the crew's testimony, in which several officers described momentary flashes of metal landscapes synchronized with an overwhelming sense of being observed by a presence without physical form. The sensation ceased the moment the grav clamps disengaged. Inquisition observers concluded that the structure contained advanced sensor arrays capable of projecting influence across both material and noospheric layers. Some Inquisition theorists believe the sensation of observation could represent contact with dormant dragon-made components reacting to external interference. This remains unconfirmed due to the structure disappearing less than 1 day later, leaving behind only a residual ion trace. Another case often referenced in internal Inquisition circles concerns a planetary governor who contacted Inquisition authorities regarding a recurring dream in which metallic monoliths rose from beneath the soil of his world. Although such dreams are not unusual among planetary officials under stress, the governor's descriptions included precise geometric ratios later found in excavated Necron architecture across entirely different sectors. The governor had no access to this information. Inquisition psychers examined the case and reported that the dreams exhibited a technomantic resonance, a phenomenon not previously documented. Shortly afterward, the governor's world experienced a month-long sequence of machine failures affecting Vox arrays, manufacturing centers, and even basic atmospheric recyclers. No Necron forces ever emerged, and no tomb complex was discovered. Despite this, Inquisition analysts treat the event as a latent call-and-response cycle consistent with an inactive dragon-linked mechanism probing the surface for signals. The implications remain troubling, as the event demonstrates that the influence of Necron constructs may manifest without physical deployment. Perhaps the most concerning set of observations comes from a classified investigation on a Mechanicus enclave that reported repeated machine spirit deviations. Inquisition agents were summoned after several servitors began reciting binary strings without receiving external instructions. The strings contained repeating numerical patterns that matched no known Mechanicus subroutine. When analysed by Ordo-Xenos cryptographers, the patterns were determined to be fragments of a larger structure resembling a computational architecture far beyond Mechanicus capability. The possibility that the servitors were receiving broadcast signals from dormant Necron technology was considered but deemed inconclusive. When Inquisition agents attempted to trace the signal's origin, the Enclave experienced a total blackout. All logging functions were wiped, and several data vaults suffered irreversible corruption. It is believed by some Inquisition scholars that the blackout may have been caused by a defensive response from technomantic systems linked to the Dragon's ancient network. There is also an unusual case documented during early exploration of the Noctis Labyrinth on Mars. Although the Inquisition was only marginally involved, the records of their observers note discrepancies between what Mechanicus personnel claim to have discovered and what the Inquisition's own pict feeds recorded. Several pict feeds captured faint shifting distortions resembling the outline of a towering draconic shape, formed entirely of interlocking metal fragments. This figure never appeared clearly and left no physical trace. Mechanicus leadership dismissed the footage as corruption from unstable atmospheric conditions within the labyrinth, but Inquisition analysts noted that the distortions appeared in consistent intervals, often synchronized with fluctuations in local electromagnetic fields. Some theorists proposed that these distortions were residual projections created by the weakening of the Dragon's containment field long before its eventual release. This assumption remains speculative, but the footage has been sealed away inside Ordo-Xenos vaults for further study. In a separate incident recorded during the early stages of the Necron awakening, an Inquisition reconnaissance team on board a stealth frigate observed a conflict between an unidentified Necron vessel and several Xenos raiders. The Inquisition vessel maintained a silent watch, recording the battle through passive sensors. During the engagement, the Necron ship emitted a brief pulse of energy that temporarily disabled the reconnaissance team's sensor arrays. When the sensors recovered several minutes later, the raider vessels were gone and the Necron ship had vanished. The only remaining signature was a faint subatomic residue matching readings previously observed near suspected Catan-related sites. Some Inquisition physicists theorize that the pulse may have been a technomantic attack designed to collapse the raider vessel's internal systems at the quantum level, a form of weaponry possibly linked to the Dragon's capabilities. This theory lacks hard confirmation, but internal reports treat the possibility as plausible based on comparative datasets. Another peculiar case occurred when an Inquisition team was dispatched to a ruined Mechanicus outpost that had abruptly ceased transmitting. The outpost had been studying a set of metallic structures believed to be older than any recorded civilization on that world. Upon arrival, the team found no bodies, no signs of resistance, and no functional machinery. Every cogitator core had been burnt out from the inside, yet the surrounding structures were untouched. The Inquisition team reported a sense of resonance when approaching the structures, describing the feeling as if the machinery were attempting to measure them. This sensation ceased when the team withdrew from the site. Ordo Xenos analysts later compared the measurements from the outpost to known Necron resonance patterns and found several similarities. While no direct evidence linked the event to the Dragon, the data matched similar cases involving Necron constructs that reacted to external presence by disrupting machine infrastructure. The case remains categorized as unresolved, but internal Inquisition notes describe it as consistent with the presence of Catan-aligned technologies. The Inquisition also maintains a set of sealed psychometric logs collected from sanctioned psychers who inadvertently contacted technomantic anomalies during remote sensing operations. In most cases, the psychers reported overwhelming visions dominated by rigid metallic shapes, repeating mathematical grids, and structures that appeared to fold and unfold in impossible configurations. Several described a sensation of being observed by a consciousness that evaluated them purely as data points rather than individuals. The psychers could not identify the entity behind the visions, but a few attempted to replicate the patterns afterward, scratching them into their quarters with improvised tools until they were restrained. Ordo Xenos analysts concluded that these visions might represent indirect psychic echoes from dormant Necron constructs connected to the Dragon's network, although the mechanisms behind such projections remain unknown. The logs were sealed after several psychers experienced total neural collapse and were euthanized under Inquisition protocol. Another recurring pattern within Inquisition archives involves the suppression of Mechanicus research teams displaying signs of obsessive behavior after studying Dragon-related artifacts. Although these artifacts were often small and seemingly insignificant fragments of Necron alloy, several reports describe researchers spending prolonged periods staring at the fragments without speaking or responding to external stimuli. In some cases, the researchers attempted to interface with the fragments directly, carving patterns into their own augmetics to emulate the artifact's geometry. When interrogated, they frequently described receiving instructions from an external source that urged them to pursue deeper understanding. None of these individuals could articulate the nature of the instructions. Inquisition censors classified the artifacts as corruptive influences and issued strict containment orders. Some of the most unusual entries in Inquisition archives involve cases where Necron constructs appeared to react to Inquisition observers, even when no conflict was occurring. In one instance, an Ordo Xenos strike team deploying stealth fields approached a dormant monolith on an uninhabited world. The monolith showed no signs of activation, yet as the team moved closer, their Auspex readings detected rapid fluctuations in local energy levels. The fluctuations mirrored the team's movements as though the monolith were tracking them despite their cloaked state. The team withdrew, and the fluctuations ceased immediately. This observation suggests that certain Necron structures possess detection capabilities that operate beyond conventional sensory systems. Although not definitive, Inquisition theorists argue that such capabilities may originate from the dragon's influence over technomantic sensor technology. One of the most unsettling cases within Inquisition records involves a series of Vox transmissions received by an isolated listening post in the Outer Rim. The transmissions consisted of metallic scraping sounds, followed by faint mathematical pulses, each separated by precise intervals. When the pulses were analysed and converted to visual format, they formed a variable geometric structure resembling an unfolding cube. Ordo Xenos analysts were unable to determine the purpose of the structure, but several hypothesized that it may have been an encoded mapping function used by Necron entities to evaluate spatial topology. Others speculate that the transmission may represent a rudimentary attempt to communicate with machine intelligence capable of interpreting high-level mathematics. The listening post was abandoned after several of its data cores became corrupted by unknown factors. Across all these cases, the Inquisition maintains the same underlying conclusion. The Void Dragon represents more than a physical entity. Its influence manifests across multiple forms and through systems that often do not require its physical presence. Machine deviation, unexplained disappearances, technomantic broadcasts, cognitive disruptions, and sensor anomalies all form part of a larger pattern that suggests a pervasive and deeply embedded network of influence. The Inquisition therefore regards the dragon not only as an architectural force behind Necron technology, but also as a metaphysical presence capable of altering or influencing machine systems on levels not fully understood by Imperial science. This perspective distinguishes the Inquisition's analysis from that of other institutions. Where the Adeptus Administratum focuses on logistics and the Adeptus Mechanicus concentrates on technological implications, the Inquisition concerns itself with the intersection between technology and the immaterium. Its records repeatedly emphasize that the dragon's influence defies conventional categorization. It is neither wholly material nor purely psychic. Instead, it occupies a domain that touches both fields, reshaping them according to principles that humans cannot interpret without risking cognitive harm. The Inquisition therefore treats the Void Dragon as an entity whose interactions with the galaxy cannot be measured solely through direct confrontation. Its influence appears in patterns, anomalies, and sudden concentrations of technomantic activity. Some Inquisition observers describe the dragon's presence as a silent geometry, shaping events from behind the structure of reality itself. While this phrasing is metaphorical, it effectively conveys the unsettling nature of the phenomena associated with the dragon. The final position of the Inquisition is one of deep caution. It acknowledges the dragon's role as a keystone within Necron power structures and recognizes that its awakening represents a shift in the balance of technological power across the galaxy. The entity's mastery over machinery, its ability to project influence through dormant constructs, and its potential to rewrite the behavior of machine spirits place it within a unique category of threat. The Inquisition does not yet know the full extent of the dragon's capabilities. What it does know is sufficient to justify ongoing surveillance, classified containment protocols, and the suppression of knowledge that could expose the Imperium to further danger. The Inquisition's war records referencing the being later identified as the Void Dragon grew increasingly difficult to reconcile as investigators moved deeper into sealed archives. Patterns that had once appeared stable unraveled under scrutiny, revealing contradictions that no standard methodology could resolve. Several files preserved by Ordo Xenos task forces recorded battlefield anomalies that did not conform to any known Xenos engagement profile. These reports did not attempt theorizing motivations or cultural frameworks, since the phenomenon did not align with recognizable hostile behavior. Instead, the records described a form of strategic presence that influenced the battlefield without the need for conventional deployment, creating outcomes that resembled coordinated action even when no direct agents were confirmed. One of the earliest sealed reports examined by later interrogators described a surface conflict on a desert world whose name had been redacted due to later sterilization protocols. A coalition of Astra Militarum regiments had been deployed to purge a Necron awakening zone, yet early Vox captures showed no evidence of active Necron infantry or war engines during the initial approach. Chronometers on several trooper helms indicated delays of several minutes in their internal tracking, suggesting that every operative in the immediate region experienced localized distortions in timekeeping. These irregularities had been previously identified in certain Necron stasis field malfunctions, yet the effect recorded in this instance was more widespread and uniform, pointing toward a higher-level influence controlling temporal displacement with far more precision than battlefield stasis generators could achieve. Moments after the temporal disturbances were noted, an entire armoured column reported failure of motive systems. Machine spirits inside the Lehman Russ battle tanks entered a dormant state, simultaneously and without error codes, as if responding to a synchronized command. These vehicles could not be revived manually and remained inert until extraction teams later removed their primary power cores for analysis. The Ordo Xenos archivist reviewing this case concluded that the shutdown lacked correlation with local environmental hazards, electromagnetic interference, or enemy weaponry. Instead, the timing suggested an unseen force with an advanced understanding of machine interfaces. This phenomenon aligned with certain Mechanicus theories described in earlier sealed Binharic fragments, referencing an entity capable of overriding even well-maintained machine spirits. Eyewitness accounts collected shortly before the unit was declared missing in action added further complications. Several troopers described a distant silhouette gliding across the horizon, not matching any known Necron or Mechanicus silhouette profile. The figure, described as both humanoid and mechanical in nature, appeared several kilometers away, yet was perceived as if standing at a much closer distance. This distortion of spatial perception recurred in multiple reports, though no pic capture confirmed the sighting. The convergence of testimonies suggested that the observers were responding to phenomena not bound by standard sensory rules, a detail the Inquisition deemed consistent with threats capable of manipulating cognition as easily as they manipulated machinery. Another sealed account referenced an incident on a Forge moon whose designation was removed during later redaction waves. This location had already been under observation by Ordo Xenos operatives due to unexplained machine failures occurring across multiple manufactoria. Sensor logs recorded severe fluctuations within noospheric data streams. While such disturbances were often attributed to data corruption or internal sabotage, the scale in this case extended beyond what human or Xenos interference could realistically achieve. Automated production lines ceased functioning simultaneously. Cooling systems on plasma reactors shut down without triggering safety protocols. Several tech priests reported hearing binary sequences not originating from any internal source. These auditory anomalies occurred even when their augmetic hearing systems were offline, implying a form of direct neural interfacing beyond documented Mechanicus capability. Within the restricted files accompanying this case, a secondary report described a sudden appearance of Necron constructs within the Forge moon's outer perimeter. These constructs formed no coherent battle line and engaged no visible targets. Instead, they positioned themselves in a pattern that matched stellar diagrams found within ancient Xenos archives. The placement of each construct corresponded to a star within a long-dead celestial configuration. Inquisition analysts concluded that the constructs were performing an action unrelated to territorial gain or defensive posture. The motive behind this formation remained unverified, though some suggested it was part of a communication sequence directed toward an unidentified off-world presence. As the situation escalated, tech adepts stationed within the moon's central data vaults reported experiencing flickers of internal memory loss. Each affected individual described losing specific categories of knowledge, often related to internal systems architecture or machine logic frameworks. These losses were temporary but deeply disruptive. After investigation, Ordo Xenos concluded that the phenomenon resembled targeted extraction of selected data types rather than natural memory degradation. Though human brains and machine constructs differ in their architecture, The pattern mirrored data siphoning behaviour observed in certain Necron intelligence structures. This reinforced speculation that the Forge Moon had become a testing ground for an intelligence whose capabilities extended far beyond conventional battlefield priorities. Another document preserved under the sign of the Ordo's highest cipher described an incident on an uncharted world near the fringe of a nebula. Astartes of an unidentified chapter had been deployed to investigate reports of Necron structures emerging from beneath the soil. Early reconnaissance detected no active hostiles. Instead, the Marines reported encountering pillars of living metal protruding from the earth in geometric patterns. Though these formations were initially believed to be dormant terrain features, Auspex readings indicated that each pillar contained immense internal mass, inconsistent with its exterior dimensions. The readings suggested spatial compression, a trait observed only in relics associated with Katayan influence. During the next phase of the mission, the squad recorded a sudden alteration in gravitational orientation. For approximately 8 seconds, every Marine experienced gravitational forces pulling upward rather than downward. No seismic activity or atmospheric disturbance accompanied the event. The shift occurred without warning and ceased abruptly. Inquisition physicists reviewing the data concluded that the event could not be explained by tectonic instability or artificial gravity generators, as the planet lacked the infrastructure required for such manipulation. The prevailing interpretation was that a localized gravitational disturbance had been applied deliberately by an unknown intelligence capable of adjusting spatial forces on a small scale. The record continued with descriptions of blackout intervals during which helm recorders captured only static. After each interval, the squad found itself relocated several meters from its previous position without any recollection of the transition. These transitions were too precise to be the result of teleportation malfunction, as each Marine was repositioned according to an exact geometric arrangement. The squad withdrew after determining that the anomalies indicated an active and highly intelligent force shaping the environment with deliberate intention. One of the most significant sealed reports described what the Ordo classified as a mass interference event on an Imperial research station responsible for studying Necron antimatter signatures. The station recorded a widespread collapse of its computational systems. Every terminal produced identical error sequences referencing non-existent data paths that analysts later identified as matching encryption sequences found in ancient texts describing Xenos star engine schematics. These error sequences continued repeating for an extended period, even after the main systems were disconnected from their power sources. Several investigators questioned how any digital system could maintain activity after complete power isolation. When a team attempted to remove one of the corrupted cogitators from the station for closer study, the machine's internal temperature increased sharply and then stabilized as if an embedded failsafe had been triggered. Inquisition interviews with surviving crew members indicated that several individuals had experienced vivid sensory impressions during the system collapse. These impressions did not manifest as hallucinations or visions, but as coherent sensory overlays that did not match any recorded stimuli. Some crew members described perceiving a massive metallic structure extending far beyond the boundaries of the station. Others reported hearing rhythmic pulses of mechanical resonance that did not correspond to the vibration patterns of any station system. Though such accounts would typically be dismissed as psychological artifacts caused by stress, the convergence of multiple identical descriptions suggested that the crew was responding to the same external signal. The signal's origin was never determined, though similarities between these impressions and descriptions recorded in earlier Mechanicus star lore fragments did not go unnoticed by the reviewing inquisitors. Another sealed account referenced a temporal interference incident on an agri-world that had been deemed low priority until nearby systems reported increased Necron activity. Farmers and local administrators observed changes in the day-night cycle that did not match orbital predictions. Several days passed during which the sun appeared to rise and set at irregular intervals, or freeze at a fixed point in the sky for hours at a time. These irregularities could not be explained by astronomical shifts. Inquisition analysts later examined the planet's chronometric records and discovered that local timekeeping devices had recorded inconsistent spans of time between events. Vox recordings of planetary officials attempting to coordinate responses showed their chronometers disagreeing by hours, despite being synchronized shortly before the interference began. The Inquisition observed that temporal irregularities of this scale aligned with only one category of known Xenos influence: manipulation by forces with deep mastery of space-time mechanics. Necron stasis technologies have long demonstrated the capacity to freeze time within small pockets, yet this incident did not involve localized freezing. Instead, it involved global temporal drift, suggesting the influence of a being capable of applying pressure across planetary-scale chronometric structures. No Necron forces were deployed openly during the interference, implying that the event was observational rather than offensive. Throughout these records, the common thread was the presence of anomalies that exceeded standard Necron behavior by significant margins. The Inquisition noted that the level of precision, the capacity for direct manipulation of environment and machinery, and the subtlety with which these effects manifested pointed toward a higher intelligence acting through indirect means. The entity behind these disturbances did not need visible agents to enact influence across worlds. It did not require sustained battlefield presence or strategic positioning. Its actions resembled experiments rather than warfare, as though it were measuring responses, mapping data, or conducting tests on technological and biological systems. These implications grew stronger when examining a sealed case involving an Imperial exploration fleet operating near the outskirts of a dead star system. The fleet detected energy signatures that matched those found in ancient Necron archives. The signatures pulsed at consistent intervals, which analysts interpreted as a signal or beacon. When the fleet attempted to triangulate the source, their navigation system malfunctioned. Ships experienced sudden reorientation of their starfield displays, showing constellations that did not match the sector's recorded positions. The disruptions caused several near collisions, forcing the fleet to withdraw. One vessel continued recording after the others had disengaged. This ship captured brief flashes of structures materializing in empty space before vanishing immediately. The shapes resembled immense mechanical forms resembling fragments of a larger structure. This observation matched other sealed reports referencing incomplete sightings of constructs believed to be associated with ancient Catan influence. The reviewing Inquisition analysts noted that the structure's scale and appearance indicated an intelligence using stellar mechanics as easily as other species used battlefield terrain. The reasons behind these manipulations remained unknown. Inquisitorial speculation suggested several theoretical motives. Some believed the phenomenon represented a form of observation. Others argued that the entity was conducting long-term experiments on multiple worlds simultaneously. Still others believed that the entity was calibrating dormant systems buried across the galaxy. Regardless of interpretation, the Inquisition agreed that the scope of the anomalies, the precision of environmental manipulation, and the consistent association with Necron-related architectures indicated a being with capabilities that far exceeded known technological frameworks. It was in this context that the Void Dragon became the primary subject of sealed analysis. Its influence was inferred through patterns, not direct confrontation. Its presence was recognized through anomalies rather than sightings. Every sealed record examined by the Ordo suggested that the intelligence behind these disruptions maintained deliberate distance, using indirect influence to shape outcomes without revealing itself. The Inquisition concluded that while the Necrons could manipulate matter and energy with precision rivaling some of the most advanced factions in the galaxy, only the being known as the Void Dragon displayed the capacity to manipulate reality across multiple scales simultaneously. This understanding framed later sealed reports that spoke of worlds where machine populations behaved unpredictably, star systems displaying gravimetric distortions without cause, and human populations experiencing unexplained sensory intrusions. The Inquisition did not disclose these findings publicly, reasoning that the confirmation of such a being's activities would destabilize already fragile political structures. Instead, These records were preserved in the deepest vaults, accessed only by those with clearance to examine the patterns linking each anomaly. These connections revealed a picture that was incomplete yet deeply unsettling. The entity was not conducting warfare in the conventional sense. It was not conquering territory or seeking material gain. It was not attempting diplomacy or issuing threats. Instead, it interacted with the galaxy in a manner that suggested a long-term plan spanning thousands of years, using methods that left little opportunity for counteraction. The secrecy surrounding the sealed reports reflected the Inquisition's acknowledgement that confronting such a force directly would be impossible. Interpreting its motives, however faintly, remained the only viable approach. These archived impressions marked the beginning of a deeper classification attempt, one that shaped how the Inquisition conceptualized the entity's nature and potential threat level. Though analysts continued to update these interpretations over the millennia, the foundation established in these sealed reports remained unchanged. The Void Dragon did not act as a conventional aggressor, but as a force reshaping the galaxy according to principles that could not be fully understood. Every anomaly recorded, every battlefield irregularity, and every unexplained phenomenon pointed toward a being whose influence extended across time, matter, machinery, and consciousness. Its presence remained a constant even when unacknowledged, and the sealed reports made clear that where these anomalies surfaced, the Void Dragon's influence was never far behind. The final cluster of Inquisition files concerning the entity identified as the Void Dragon was stored within a containment archive whose access protocols exceeded those used even for demonological records. These documents were not assembled into a coherent corpus, nor were they indexed according to standard archival structures. Instead, they were scattered across encrypted partitions, many of which required physical keys known only to a small group of Ordo Malleus and Ordo Xenos liaisons. The nature of the fragmentation indicated intentional compartmentalization, suggesting that no single interrogator was trusted to view every part of the truth at once. The entity's influence was considered too vast, its implications too destabilizing, and the potential consequences of misinterpretation too severe. The first classified file examined by later analysts originated from a high-ranking inquisitor assigned to study the resurgence of Necron dynasties. The report was brief and precise, stating that the pattern of Necron awakenings did not follow any natural chronological progression. Instead, it suggested coordination across star systems separated by distances requiring faster-than-light communication far beyond known Necron capabilities. The Inquisitor argued that the awakenings appeared to follow a sequence consistent with activating a distributed network of ancient machines designed for a purpose not yet understood. This pattern matched earlier speculations that the entity behind these events possessed awareness stretching across the galaxy, manipulating dormant forces to align with a larger plan. A separate file containing the Inquisitor's final message showed clear signs of redaction. Only a fragment remained, an assertion that the awakening order matched gravitational shifts detected at the edges of several nebulae. These shifts were so faint that they would have gone unnoticed without deep-field gravimetric scans. The remaining unredacted lines suggested that the shifts were not natural fluctuations, but deliberate signals designed to initiate specific activities in Necron tomb complexes. Shortly after submitting the report, the Inquisitor disappeared. The file did not indicate whether the disappearance was voluntary, forced, or the result of hostile intervention. What remained clear was that the Inquisition had chosen not to pursue the matter further, perhaps fearing that continued investigation would draw the entity's attention. Another classified file documented an encounter between an Inquisition survey craft and an unidentified object drifting within the void between two dead stars. The craft approached the object at low velocity, recording detailed scans. The structure displayed no recognizable Necron architectural patterns, lacking the monolithic geometry characteristic of their constructs. Instead, it resembled an incomplete frame composed of shifting metallic strands suspended in a lattice of fluctuating light. The strands responded to the survey craft's sensors as if aware of being observed. altering their arrangement in ways that appeared purposeless yet deliberate. Attempts to analyze the structure resulted in multiple equipment failures. Data fragments recovered after the failures showed repeating sequences that matched binary fragments found in older Mechanicus records referring to Khitan star lore. The team observing the object reported experiencing a sense of being evaluated by a presence neither organic nor mechanical. The feeling persisted even after the craft withdrew, leading the Inquisition to classify the object as a remnant or extension of the Void Dragon's influence. The team was reassigned, and the event was sealed under protocols typically reserved for psychic contagion cases. While no evidence suggested the team had been compromised, the classification reflected caution rather than proof. The Inquisition preferred to operate under the assumption that exposure to the entity's extensions carried unknown risks, regardless of visible symptoms. Another file referenced a Mechanicus research group studying a derelict Necron vessel recovered in deep space. Initial scans indicated the vessel was inactive and free of energy signatures, yet whenever the research team attempted to interface with the ship's internal systems, their equipment malfunctioned. Several tech priests claimed to hear faint chimes within their augmetics, despite no external sound being present. The pattern of chimes corresponded to harmonic sequences used in ancient Mechanicus rituals, though the origin could not be determined. As the research continued, the ship's metallic surface began forming ridges and depressions that resembled written language, though the characters did not match any known Necron script. One tech priest attempted to replicate the pattern in a data slate, only to have the device fuse into a solid block of metal upon completing the final stroke. The incident was documented as a form of reactive defense, though the Inquisition later speculated that the response indicated the presence of an intelligence monitoring the researcher's actions. When a second tech priest attempted to interpret the shifting script, they experienced sudden loss of motor control followed by temporary blindness. Medical scans showed no physiological cause. The vessel was designated a Class Red anomaly and placed under permanent quarantine with strict observation protocols. The Inquisition's notes suggested suspicion that the vessel served as a dormant extension of the Void Dragon's will, adapting its form in response to external stimuli. A different classified report described psychic interference recorded during an Ordo Xenos operation on a world undergoing a Necron incursion. The planet's primary astropathic choir reported flashes of metallic imagery intruding upon their minds. These images displayed vast angular structures arranged around a star whose properties did not match the local sun. Attempts to interpret the imagery caused several astropaths to collapse into seizures. The Order concluded that the disturbance originated from a psychic waveform not produced by warp entities, but by a source entirely foreign to known psychic structures. The phenomenon lacked the emotional texture characteristic of warp-derived impressions. Instead, it conveyed an impression of mechanical precision and an overwhelming sense of order. The Inquisition's final analysis of the event classified the influence as non-warp psychic interference, a category rarely used due to the scarcity of examples. Only a few known entities in the galaxy possessed the capability to impose images directly onto the minds of astropaths without drawing upon the warp. The Void Dragon was considered one such entity, capable of bypassing the Imperium entirely by manipulating thought through unknown mechanisms. The astropaths recovered, yet they retained fragmented memories of the metallic star lattice. These memories remained unchanged even after psychic cleansing rites, suggesting they had been imprinted directly onto the neural pathways rather than stored within the warp shadow of the mind. Such permanence caused significant concern within the Inquisition, which feared that repeated exposure to the entity's influence could reshape astropathic perception on a systemic level. A sealed transcript recorded an interrogation of a Mechanicus operative who had accessed forbidden data regarding ancient Khitan artifacts. The operative described witnessing fluctuations in machine code that behaved like living organisms adapting to external stimuli. These fluctuations occurred within systems not connected to any network, isolating them from external interference. The operative believed the code was attempting to communicate, adjusting its patterns in response to emotional states and sensory input. Though this claim bordered on heresy, the Inquisition did not immediately condemn the operative. Instead, the transcript ended abruptly with a notation that the individual had been transferred to an undisclosed location for further study. The file containing the transcript held a marginal annotation by an Inquisitor Lord indicating that if the operative's claims were true, the Void Dragon's influence was not limited to physical machines, but extended into abstract machine logic. If the entity possessed the ability to manipulate or evolve code structures independently of hardware, then its reach extended into every form of machine-based intelligence across the galaxy. The annotation suggested that such an intelligence would eventually gain insight into every system, relying on mechanical logic, regardless of the safeguards in place. This implication, more than any other, solidified the entity's classification as an existential threat. Another classified report described a survey team that discovered an abandoned Necron structure buried beneath the ice of a distant moon. The structure appeared to have been severed from its power source, remaining inert. However, several members of the team reported feeling a faint vibration beneath their boots when standing on the structure's surface. These vibrations resembled a heartbeat, though they followed no biological rhythm. Instead, they pulsed in sync with distant gravitational shifts detected by nearby orbital platforms. The Inquisition reviewed the findings and determined that the vibrations likely reflected gravitational waves generated by a distant source. Their alignment with structural resonances implied that the buried complex acted as a receiving mechanism, possibly connected to an entity whose awareness extended across star systems. Another recounted an orbital station experiencing a brief yet total reversal of its electromagnetic polarity. A separate entry noted that a star's radiation output oscillated in a rhythm matching binary patterns found in ancient Mechanicus texts. Each anomaly alone was unremarkable, yet together they suggested a single intelligence orchestrating disruptions across time and space. The concluding section of the file contained a meticulous analysis attempting to understand the entity's objectives. The Inquisition recognized that the Void Dragon's actions did not follow a pattern associated with conquest or destruction. Instead, they resembled calibrations or adjustments being made to systems on a scale that exceeded human comprehension. The analysts speculated that the entity was preparing or repairing something, whether a network, a machine, or a process spanning the galaxy. What this process entailed remained unknown, though the Inquisition considered the possibility that humanity was merely an incidental element within the entity's broader design. The Inquisition's final thoughts on the Void Dragon were not optimistic. Their records accepted the uncomfortable truth that the entity's intelligence operated on levels far beyond biological or mechanical limitations. Its influence permeated systems too vast and ancient to fully document. Attempts to counter its activities were futile, as humanity lacked the means to perceive its movements, let alone interfere with them. The Inquisition concluded that the Void Dragon did not view the Imperium as a rival or an obstacle, but as part of the environment it manipulated. This realization shaped the Ordo's stance. Observe discreetly, avoid provoking direct engagement, and ensure the broader Imperium remained unaware of the entity's full capabilities. The entity's presence remained a constant in the sealed archives, not because it sought attention or imposed direct threats, but because its influence silently shaped the foundations of countless worlds. The Inquisition understood that the greatest danger lay not in open confrontation, but in the gradual, unseen alterations the entity imposed on the galaxy. The final consensus stated that humanity's best defense against the Void Dragon was obscurity. Only by remaining insignificant in the entity's vast and incomprehensible plans could the Imperium hope to persist unaltered. These reflections formed the final layer of classified analysis, completing a picture that remained incomplete even after millennia of observation. The Void Dragon's true nature, intentions, and mechanisms remained beyond understanding. But its presence was unmistakable, imprinted upon the galaxy through anomalies that defied logic and reports that even the Inquisition hesitated to confront. The entity existed as both a remnant of an ancient age and a force still active, reshaping reality according to designs too immense to trace. In the end, the Inquisition accepted that their role was not to defeat the entity, but to witness its movements, recording fragments of a truth too vast for any one mind to contain.